Claire Scriven, MLC, Shadow Spokesperson for Forests and Regional Development in South Australia. Thanks for joining us again on Flow.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
The federal government and the South Australian Liberal government are making an announcement today about money coming forward so forest products from Kangaroo Island can get across to the mainland. What's the Labor Party's response to that?
Look, we're certainly glad to see that there's finally some kind of subsidy. We know that back in May 2020 there was a federal subsidy available, so it's been, I think, a problem that the state government has been so slow to make sure that something's delivered to South Australia. But it also does raise a question. As far as we can see, there's no requirement that this timber goes to South Australian businesses. So we know there are hundreds of small builders that are facing the wall because they haven't been able to access timber. Our view is that if South Australian taxpayers are putting money into this, which is an important project, that we should have the guarantees that that timber will go to South Australian businesses. And that's a guarantee that we don't have at this stage.
So the federal government there, I think it's 15 million, correct me if I'm wrong, that they're throwing into the mix here. Wouldn't they say, well, it's federal taxpayer money, the whole of the nation should benefit from the timber?
Well, according to the state government's release, they are putting in some money. It does look as though that money might simply be a re-announcement of an expression of interest for $2 million that was announced back in June, with maybe $1 extra million put in. We don't have that detail, but that's what it looks like it might be. But if the South Australian taxpayers are putting in money, I think it's reasonable that it's South Australian businesses that should benefit.
Well, historically, was the plantation there in Kangaroo Island planted with a view that it supports the South Australian supply needs?
Look, the history around that is a little bit more complicated. They were planted on Kangaroo Island as part of the managed investment scheme back in the late 90s, early 2000s. So there were a lot of issues around trees that were planted at that time. What we need to make sure going forward is that trees are planted in the right place so that they can have access to markets and access to processing. But I guess the Kangaroo Island situation is a bit of a historical anomaly.
Is there something the opposition will be doing in Parliament? You're sitting this week about this and the wish to keep this timber in South Australian hands?
Look, certainly we want to make sure that the government answers the question of whether this timber will go to South Australian businesses, and we'll be doing everything we can to ensure that it does.
And the state government, they've had a bit of a go at Labor's record in government in the press release from Minister Basham saying that if the forestry hadn't been sold or leased, if we want to be accurate, in the mid-north and the southeast, then we would be able to shore up our own supply. What's the Labor Party's response to that?
Look, I think it's a bit disappointing that they're playing that sort of political game scoring. The reality is that whoever owns forests, contracts are in place, and contracts are usually for a reasonably long term. So I don't think that there's really much credibility to that argument.
So do the contracts that were put in place when the forestry was leased for 99 years or whatever it was, did that provide some surety that supply would go to South Australia first?
Well, I wasn't obviously in Parliament when that was happening. It's a decade ago now since the forests were sold off, or the forward rotations were sold off. So it's probably a question that's a little bit out of the time frame that I've been involved in Parliament.
All right, well, we might have to chase that up further with with the opposition because, I guess that's really what it's going to come down to is we're talking about guaranteeing supply from KI. The state government's probably going to make a bit of noise about what happened previously with forestry, so we'll look into that further. Claire Scriven, MLC, thanks for joining us talking about that topic, and hopefully we will make sure we do look after the South Australian construction industry.
Great. Thanks very much.